Well, welcome everyone today to the AGEC meeting here at Severn Park. I have apologies for absence from Councillor Wilcox, but apart from that, everybody else appears to be here. Emergency evacuation procedures, I'll pass over to my right here.
So I haven't been advised that there is a fire alarm due to be tested today, so if you do hear the continuous sound of the fire alarm, then follow myself, we'll be downstairs and then out come through to the yard, but yeah, we'll be following.
Thanks, Angie. Declarations of interest. I've had none advised, but are there any that anybody wishes to declare? I don't have any. Good, okay. We'll move on to agenda item 4, Chair's business. So just to confirm that this AGEC meeting is taking place as a face-to-face meeting, as obviously you're aware. Unfortunately, due to the continued prevalence of COVID-19, we continue to have capacity restrictions on meeting rooms and therefore have had to limit the number of attendees and the entry of press and public, and that's why we've got you all spread out as well. For this reason, we are recording this meeting for the public to view, whereas before COVID, committee meetings were not recorded. Do any of the attendees have any problems with them being recorded? No. Okay, that's brilliant. Okay, I'm going to ask members now to introduce themselves. I'll start with myself. Councillor Paul Goggin, I am a Labour councillor for Hartcliffe and Withywood on Bristol City Council, and I chair AGEC. And I'll have Richard.
Labour and also Secretary of Western Supermarket Ward.
Thank you.
I'm Robert Payne, Lib Dem Councillor for Western Supermarket Central and Somerset Council.
Neil Buzzers, Lib Dem Councillor for Bath Avon South and Bath North East Somerset.
Councillor Ernie Brown, Councillor for Stoke Gifford, South Gloucester.
Councillor John Ash, South Gloucester Councillor and Councillor for Bradley Silks.
Thank you all, members. I will now ask the officers here to introduce themselves as well.
Morning, I'm Angie Feeney, I'm the Director of Corporate Services here at Avon Fire Rescue Service.
Good morning, I'm Amanda Brown, I'm the Clerk to Avon Fire Authority.
Should we go around this way?
Morning, Steve Gregory, Democratic Services, Bristol City Council.
Good morning, I'm Emma Bowen, Democratic Services Assistant at Avon Fire.
Good morning, I'm Joanne Watt, Bristol Assistant to Director of Corporate Services.
Good morning, I'm Danielle Neal, Fire Authority Treasurer.
Okay, and I'll ask other attendees today to introduce themselves when they come to talk. Okay, just a couple of bits of Chair's business. First off, since our last meeting, we've had the announcement that Mccloud, our Chief Fire Officer, will be retiring on the 31st of March next year after 30 years of service to a variety of fire services. We'd like to thank him very much for the last few years here at Avon and how he's taken the service and really transformed it and moved it into a much better place, and we wish him obviously all the best when he does finally leave and go off on his retirement to the sunlit uplands, probably. And I'll also just mention the work of Avon Fire and Rescue Service employees, past and present, who have been working with SARAID out in Haiti following the earthquake there, doing search and rescue. Obviously they do fantastic work all around the world. I'll just explain how we're going to vote today. Because we're in public, we can do a show of hands, a vote, but I will ask members for any votes against, then I will ask them for any abstentions, and then I'll ask those in favour. So, that's the housekeeping over with. So, moving on to agenda item 5, the minutes from the last meeting. I have them here in front of me. Does anybody have any issues, or do you want to go through them page by page? Or does anybody have any issues with the minutes from the last meeting? Okay, I'd like to propose that they are a fair and accurate record of that meeting. May I have a seconder, please? Thank you. I will sign those and pass them on at the end of the meeting. Okay, moving on to agenda item 6, the public access statement. We haven't received any new public access statements for this meeting, but I'm going to pass over to the clerk now to explain concerning previous public access statements.
Thank you, Chair. So members will recall that a public access statement was received from a member of the public at our previous meeting on the 14th of July, and a response to that public access statement was read out at our last meeting. Part of that public access statement related to the decision to redevelop the Avonmouth site, and we are in the process of responding to the member of the public in relation to that issue. That response will be shared with members of this committee. In relation to the matters raised in the public access statement relating to technical financial accounting relating to Avonmouth Station, the member of the public has also sent emails raising these and other questions to the external auditors, Deloitte, following the public inspection of our accounts. Those emails are being worked through and will be the subject of a composite formal response from the auditors, which will also be copied to members of this committee. The receipt of and work going into considering these questions and information requests made by the member of the public are also noted in both the external auditors and the treasurer reports to the committee today. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Okay, moving on to agenda item 7, which we'll deal with in conjunction with agenda item 8 as well, and we'll take recommendations after both presentations. I'd like to invite Ian from Deloitte to come and present first. Would you like to? Thank you, Ian.
For you a report on our audit of the accounts for 2020-21, which is referred to as the ISA 260 report. It brings together the work of our team across the audit this year. I will take you through the various elements of that report, if I may, just to summarise where we're at. On page 13, which is the key messages in this report. At the time we wrote the report, there were a number of items outstanding in terms of the audit. I can confirm that the pension fund auditor's work is still outstanding. That is something that the Treasurer and I have been chasing up. It is part of the delays within the system of auditing local government accounts at the moment that is still awaited, and that will prevent us from completing the audit by the end of September, but as soon as we receive that data we will be in a position to complete the audit. So that's one of the key things, just why we haven't actually signed the accounts or won't be signing the accounts today. But it is consistent across the system, and you're still at the very early end of signing. I think a lot won't be signed, certainly this year, the way things are going across the country. A number of other things there in terms of we've had responses now in relation to the Goodwin and Mccloud from our internal specialists, who we're working through those. We've had responses to our queries on payroll. The final tie-throughs are working their way through, and the internal quality reviews are outstanding still, but they're working their way through the system. So once that's done, we will need then a signed management representation letter, and we will complete a review of the events since the balance sheet date and sign the accounts off. But we're in very good shape. I see no reason at the moment why we would modify the opinion, which means basically it would be an unmodified, clean opinion on the accounts based on the work that we've done to date. Also, In terms of value for money, I have written a letter to you which may not have come to you yet, which is about the fact that because of the unusual circumstances this year and the late issue of the guidance to auditors in relation to value for money, there is the 3-month period after the accounts are signed in which we can complete that work on value for money. However, in order to give the opinion, we complete a large amount of the risk assessment in relation to value for money. And I am absolutely delighted to report that we have not identified any significant weaknesses in your arrangements to secure value for money. Members who've been on this committee for a while will remember that last year we qualified our value for money conclusion and the year before in relation to issues raised in previous inspections. So it is, I think it's really good to show the progress that, having looked at the progress that's been made on the action plan and responding to those reports, we can confirm that we do not identify any significant weaknesses in the arrangements to secure value for money. By the end of the year, or 3 months after the opinion on the accounts, we will produce what is called the Auditor's Annual Report, and that will go through each of the arrangements that the National Audit Office expect to see in relation to value for money, and we'll give our comments on what we found in place and why we came to the conclusion there were no significant weaknesses. There is some further work to be done, but as I say, based on the work that we've done today, we haven't identified any significant weaknesses, and I think that should be noted by the committee as a significant improvement from where we've been in previous years. I'll run through a few other points on the report as well, because there are some important points there. It just sets out our materiality, which is 1.1 million. That means that we're saying if there's an error of that level in the accounts that isn't adjusted, if we identify something greater than that and it's not adjusted, then that would change our opinion on the accounts. But anything below that, we say, well, it doesn't really change the view of true and fair presentation of the accounts. So that's an important number in the accounts. We've considered the pandemic and the impact on the accounts, and that will have changed the way in which we did the audit this year. So sometimes we'll be able to do a look at what was the number last year, what is the number this year, is there anything that might have changed that, and look at those movements. Whereas because of COVID, many of the numbers will have changed, and therefore we would have done more substantive testing as a result of that. And we just take you through some of the areas there, but I'll assume that is there for your information. We talk about significant risks then, and audit committee members get quite concerned when I talk about significant risks. It is audit language. It just means the areas where our audit will focus. Now, there are 2 significant risks that basically the auditing standard said should be in every audit. The first one is around management override of controls. So the auditing standards say, regardless of the organisation, how good they are, or whatever, you have to assume that management could override the controls in place. So that has to be in the audit. So we refer to it as a significant risk, but it will be in every audit plan you will find across the world and in sort of any set of accounts. So I want you to understand that that is not specific to you. It is in all audit plans. We have to assume that, and we have to do it, and we just refer to that as a significant risk. Another area is that we, in most businesses, would assume there's a significant risk around revenue recognition. So when you're selling things, the revenue that is received for the products that you sell. In the public sector, that's often not the case, because actually revenue is often very simple in terms of grants or council tax income. So in this case, we've actually said, well, we think the opportunity to manipulate the accounts in the public sector is more about understating your expenditure. So in line with all of our other public sector audits, we rebut, and we say basically revenue is not a significant risk, but we replace that with one around expenditure. So again, I would expect to see the significant risk around the completeness of accruals and expenditure to be in most of our public sector audits. And it's not that I'm flagging it up as being specific to you, but it is relevant to this audit and we've looked at it. And then the final one that we've highlighted there is pension liabilities. These are big numbers. They're subject to big changes in those numbers when you change the assumptions around, say, how long people will live post-retirement, inflationary assumptions, and all sorts of things can make a big change in that number. So we always, again, in public sector, virtually every plan has pension liabilities either as a significant risk or a higher risk area. Just because you've got 2 pension schemes involved, we've classified it as a significant risk. And that doesn't mean to say we think you're going to get it wrong. What it means is we think we'll need to spend quite a bit of our audit time looking at that area. So I wanted to clarify that. I know I've probably done that before, but I know there's some new members here. We talk about it in our plan, but it's important to understand the focus of where we got from and why we refer to them as significant audit risks rather than necessarily significant risks to the organisation. We've completed most of the work in relation to those significant risks. One of the ones that you will see mentioned there is around property valuation. Property valuation is on page 24, which was another area of focus. So we didn't think it was a significant risk area. What the authority has done is said we had a valuation last year, so in 1920, we had a professional valuer come in and value our estate. Looking at what's gone on, there hasn't been a significant movement in property values in the last year. And because the SIP for code says all you need to do is value your estate at least every 5 years, the authority has chosen not to get a professional valuer in this year and has made an estimate of what it thinks the movement might be in the value. We've done our own assessment of that, and we've come up with a different value. The difference is about £500,000, so it's 517,000 difference that we've come up with. So not a material amount, using our professional valuers and using build cost indices. We will be making a recommendation to improve the estimate that management have done, because we think using build cost estimates is a more appropriate thing to use in the valuation of specialised assets like the ones that we have in the books. But overall, the difference between what we estimated and what management estimate is not material, and therefore we're comfortable with what has been done. We'll just recommend an improvement in that area. In terms of the pensions, which are covered on page 23, there are these two cases called Mccloud and Goodman. They're about how members of pension funds may have been discriminated against in the past, and there will be compensation to those people eventually. Now, the rules around what that compensation will look like are still being developed. The cases took a long time to go through statute, etc. And we've done some estimates that are slightly different to the numbers that are in the accounts, but I'm talking less than 100,000 in both cases. So again, not material amounts that would change the opinion on the accounts. So we just dotting the I's and crossing the T's in terms of the final processes on there, and taking account of the issues raised in the public access statement as well, and they will be done before we finalise it. And we will issue a final version of this document to members so as they can see that nothing material has come up in those finalisation processes. On page 26, there are a follow-up of the recommendations from the previous years, and you will have noted, I'm sure members being sharp-eyed, that the management update is missing from that. That was due to the timing of the papers. I can confirm to members that since this was issued, I've received management's updates, and I am satisfied with those updates. And again, they will be included in the final report for you to see, but they are very sensible updates from my perspective in terms of the work that has been done to address those points. I'm working my way through. Apologies, it's quite a long report. One of the things that we always take into account in planning our audits is the risk of fraud. So we make fraud inquiries across the organisation, including the Chief Fire Officer and many other senior officers, and the Audit Committee Chair indeed. Thank you, Chair, for your response. What we do is we set out there some factors that should be considered in terms of fraud risk, and then they respond to us and we follow up on those where appropriate. I'm pleased to report that nothing has come out of those fraud risk inquiries that led us to change our audit approach, and we've not identified any fraud in completing our audit, and I think it's important for members to note that. I think that's probably all of the points I wish to make on the report, but I'm more than happy to take members' questions. I appreciate it's quite a complex and technical document, and more than happy to take any questions you might have. Sure.
I can just confirm that your letter of the 20th of September was circulated to members yesterday, and I'll also confirm that's going to be uploaded to our Fire Authority website because it wasn't included in the original papers. So my clerk will take an action to upload that on the website.
Thanks, Amanda. I'd like to open now for questions to you from members. Councillor Butters.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I suppose the complaint is that there's not much to complain about. So So I think congratulations in order to Daniel and her team first and foremost, and Ian for his diligence as well. One thing I just wanted to ask about on page 15, under Harmony report, it says you were consulting with the National Office on the impact of using prior year valuation report, which may result in emphasis of financial capital, etc. Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yes, that's a very good question, Councillor. So in the 1920 accounts, the valuation was done at the 31st of March 20 when the pandemic was just kicking off, as you will all be aware. And the valuers at the time, in all valuation reports, were instructed to put in a material uncertainty to say basically the market is in a very strange position. Nobody can go out the house, you know, we can't really value things, nobody's buying anything. So the market has more uncertainty in it than at any normal time. And therefore last year's accounts, you had a paragraph in them saying the valuation was on that basis and there was uncertainty in it. In September 20, valuers were instructed that basically the market was back active again and there was no reason to continue to include a material uncertainty in their valuation. What we were looking at was the fact that because you were rolling forward the valuation from the 31st of March 20 to 21, as I said, because you felt there wasn't a major change in the valuations, did that mean we still needed to highlight it? We've consulted on that and everybody's agreed that things have moved on and there's no need for you to disclose that material uncertainty because actually you come up with a new estimate of the value and that we won't then have an emphasis on that paragraph, in our opinion, referring to it, because you'd only do that if you were drawing attention to it. So overall, the conclusion was the valuation as included in the accounts of the 31st of March 21 was a new estimate, and therefore there was no need to refer back to the material uncertainty that existed 31st of March 20. I'm conscious that that's quite technical, so if I lost you at any point, please do ask me. I'm sorry, it is quite technical, but we're satisfied with the way in which it will be presented.
Thanks, Ian. And just to echo your thanks to Danielle and Ian as well from myself. Okay.
Yeah, just
Sorry, earlier. Apologies.
but when you say total assets, 47 or 49 or 49 million, whichever, land and buildings, do they actually belong to the fire authority or are they leased from a third party, land and buildings?
Generally, my understanding is they're owned.
They are owned by the fire
But
authority.
there's a PFI asset like this one here, so they're slightly different obviously because that's under the Public Finance Initiative funding, so it's a joint ownership and you've got a provider, Babcock, involved as well. So some buildings are a bit more complicated, but the majority are owned buildings. Yeah.
So that's the majority, not all, not 100%. Okay.
Thanks, any other questions?
Chair, yeah, thanks very much for your work on this, Ian and the team. I was seeing in connection with property valuations, you mentioned the half-million variation, you mentioned in connection with the management estimates. I can't half understand why I think you mentioned bill receipts. Probably not the best method that we were using, is that right? I just wondered how that bill receipts method worked, that we have been using. Variation in the types of properties,
So management had taken an estimate of inflation effectively to say that costs have increased by inflation. There is actually, RICS, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, do publish something called build cost indices, which are basically a refined version of indexation effectively relating to build cost. So we had a more refined estimate of those build cost increases, and because these assets are specialised assets, they're valued on this modern equivalent asset valuation basis, which means you value it on the cost of effectively building a new asset to replace the asset you've got. And as I've tried to explain in the past, that might not even be in the same place, and it possibly won't be the same size building because you will have concluded if you were to rebuild, your use would be slightly different. You might have smaller corridors, you might have bigger meeting rooms, and that's going to be a major impact when you move forward in this hybrid working way of things, because actually the way in which our buildings are going to be used will no longer be banks and desks, they will be more collaborative spaces potentially, so that will influence it. But what it's saying is, if that's your basis evaluation, it's about building a new asset, then if the build costs have gone up, the evaluation goes up. It's a bit strange, because I appreciate you're not valuing necessarily the building you're looking at, but the building you would replace it with, were you to replace it. And therefore that's why the build cost indices are just more accurate than a general inflation index that might be.
Thanks, Ian. Any other questions from members? Well, thanks very much for your presentation, Ian. And as always, thank you for explaining the details to us laymen as well. I'd like to move on now to agenda item 8. I'll give you a chance to move away. And I'd like to invite Danielle, our treasurer, to come and present now, please.
Can you bring the names, please?
Good morning, members. My report follows the external auditor's report and is on page 37. And the report provides members with the audited 2020-21 Statement of Accounts and Narrative Report, and that's contained within Appendix 1. From our last AJAC meeting in mid-July, the finance team have worked closely with the external auditors to progress the audit. And it's very pleasing to note that external audit envisaged issuing an unmodified audit opinion subject to the outstanding pension issue from the auditors of the Avon Pension Fund. I think it's exceptionally pleasing given Ian's context of the national position of external audits and finalisation of accounts. In terms of the outstanding information from the Avon Pension Fund, Deloitte requested that, I believe, on the 12th of July, asking for that information to be submitted to them by the end of July. That was not delivered, and on behalf of the AJAC chair, I have followed that up with the auditors of the Avon Pension Scheme. We have received a response to outline that due to COVID, there have been resourcing challenges for those auditors, and they anticipate that pension information being shared with our auditors in October. So in terms of key issues in the report, in section 5.4 on page 38, the Fire Authority has received a request from a member of the public. This has already been touched on. And the Fire Authority finance staff, working with Bristol City Council finance team, who provide us in terms of producing the final accounts, responded to those queries. And it's just to note that a significant amount of resource, both for Bristol City Council, Avon Fire Authority, both in terms of the finance team and officers' time, was involved in responding to that. And I'd like to thank everybody involved in that. We've already touched on excuse me, the value for money work, which is in section 5.5 of my report, and I think our external auditor Ian's given members a good overview of that. I think before I go on to the recommendations, I would really like to thank both our finance lead from Bristol City Council, who is sat behind. So that's Russ. Russ coordinates these accounts, provides a huge amount of technical expertise to Avon Fire Authority. So I'd like to thank Russ and any members of the team at BCC that have helped us progress this. I'd also like to thank Claire, who's our head of finance, and Claire will be joining us in a minute to present some information to support the accounts. The finance team working with Claire and wider colleagues across the service, including Angie and her respective team and officers. So if I can go to the recommendations, and then I will pass over to Claire just to run members through 2 items. The recommendations are to review and approve the 2020-21 Statement of Accounts and Narrative Report, subject to the outstanding pensions information that we've discussed. Publish the audited Statement of Accounts and Narrative Report on our website by the 30th of September, which is in accordance with our statutory deadline. And delegate the final approval of the audited Statement of Accounts and Narrative Report when the outstanding pension information is received and reviewed by Deloitte to the Fire Authority Chair, our AJAC Chair, the Chief Finance Officer, and myself as Treasurer.
Chief Finance.
Thank you. Thank you, Clark. It's always good. And that's on the basis that obviously there are no other issues that come up, which I think our auditor has already confirmed he doesn't envisage there will be. So on that basis, I would like to hand over to Claire, our Head of Finance, and Claire will talk you through Appendix 2 and page 26, 27, if there's any other issues in terms of management responses. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. And just to say that if there aren't any issues arising, obviously this will come back to an AJAC committee, but otherwise we will delegate. Councillor Butters?
Can I just ask, we've seen an assistant member of the public. There's a lot of work in formulating questions over the past period. And I'm wondering to what degree that has proved helpful in terms of focusing on issues that may not have appeared.
Thank you, Councillor Butters. Would you like to say? Sorry, Danielle, I know you're back there on the desk there. Would you like to respond?
I didn't hear, sorry.
Oh, apologies. Yeah, would you like to just repeat your question?
I say we've heard for quite a while from a particular member of the public who's gone into a lot of detail, having worked on a number of areas, and I'm just wondering to what degree you might regard the questions that she's asked as being helpful in the wider run in terms of focusing on items that might not have otherwise come to mind.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think on behalf of the Fire Authority, we welcome members of the public raising queries and questions. And actually, that's the purpose of the inspection of accounts. So it's really helpful that members of the public do invest their own time to highlight questions and queries they have. And certainly in terms of the response we've received from this member of the public, myself and the external audit partner Ian were able to review that question and liaise with the finance team to discuss. And what we agreed to do on the main item is reclassify this issue. So there's no bearing on the bottom line, there's no bearing on taxpayers' payments, there's no bearing on materiality or a fair and true value of the accounts for ourselves and members. It's a reclassification of that which is shown on the balance sheet. So we always welcome queries. I think there comes a point, possibly, where all of us need to balance value for money in terms of to what point you continue to look at these matters, because there's a trade-off in terms of the amount of time that the fire authority and partners invest and the resultant benefit of that. So I think for me, with my treasurer hat on, it's a very welcome position. We will always take issues seriously and review them as we have. But it's then that wider value for money agenda. And I don't know if our external audit partner, Ian, also has a view on that as your external audit.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Ian, would you like to project from the back if you had anything to say on that?
We always welcome, Chair, items brought to our attention by the public that help inform our audit, and indeed, in this case, we have looked at the particular issues raised, as I said, and as the clerk has mentioned, we will be giving a full response to the member of the public in terms of the issues raised, but always helpful to have members of the public interested in the accounts. I'm always excited. It's great to see people really interested in what's going on. And it did direct a little bit of our testing in and around that area. So yes, we too welcome input. Grateful for it.
Thank you, Ian.
I think obviously I've been on the committee for some time, and I hope then through the members who've been in the committee for some time that actually the amount of work that does go into responding to the member of the public, acknowledging around that area, and as I said, we continue to do that, and in particular for this one, albeit as Danielle has highlighted, there is the balance sometimes to be struck between the investment in looking at some of those queries and actually the benefit of those ones.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Right. Claire, sorry to delay things, but I'll pass over to you now, please.
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly run through a summary of updates that were made, key updates between draft statement of accounts and narrative report, which you have on page 150, which is Appendix 2. I think for the most part they're relatively self-explanatory, so obviously we had a change of chair in between our draft version and the final version, so that's been updated now to reflect that Brenda Massey will be signing the accounts. And then we've also got a slight change in terminology from non-current assets to long-term assets so that we can be consistent. Slightly more detailed one, so we have a table in our accounts which shows bandings for senior officers' remuneration, and the original version there was a slight issue in the working paper in that some of the items have been duplicated. This was just in working paper and doesn't have any financial impact on the accounts, but the bandings have changed in the final version that you've got in your accounts today. And then that was also, there was a slight variance on one of the items in the remuneration table once that was reviewed. And as Danielle has already mentioned, when we were looking at our fixed assets, we have reclassified the works that have taken place on Avonmouth in year from land and buildings to assets under construction. This doesn't have an impact on the bottom line, it's just a change of category within the fixed assets note. So what you'll find is an extra column on the end of the table which refers to assets under construction. And the value of that was 2.4 million. But like I say, it doesn't actually affect the value of our assets overall. And then there was a slight error within some text on page 59 that's now no longer relevant, and that was the item that Ian was talking about in terms of the note that referred to last year's material uncertainty, so that has now been removed in the final version of our accounts. It's still in the version that we've got today, but that will now be removed following the advice from the auditors. So if there are any questions on any of those changes.
Thank you, Claire, and sorry, I forgot to get you to introduce yourself.
Claire Bentley, Head of Finance at Avon.
Thank you very much. Do members have questions for Claire? No questions?
And just one more item. So Ian's already mentioned that we've responded in terms of the management update on the previous findings, but I've been asked to just give a quick summary of what those responses were. So there was pages 26 and 27.
Yeah.
I think that one.
So is this the one? in
Yeah, it
Ian's
is.
report?
Yeah,
Sorry,
it is pages 26 and 27. That's right, I was
26
just
and
checking.
27. Sorry, thank you.
So with regards to the journals, those are now all authorised prior to upload by myself as the head of finance. And what we will also be looking at is whether or not it's appropriate to have additional authorisation limits within the finance team going forward. And that'll be part of a bigger review in terms of a scheme of delegation and our constitution as a fire authority. On the year-end provisions item, so I actually attended a Service Leadership Board meeting on the 20th of May to review with the Service Leadership Board the year-end reserves and provisions alongside the Treasurer, so that all of that information was fed back directly to me and then obviously taken into account when we were finalising our year-end position. With our budget holders and budget managers and the progress on the devolved budgets, there is a paper later in the pack that gives a slightly more detailed update, but as part of the new finance structure and that project, we now have dedicated finance business partners for each budget holder and budget manager within the service, and they are now meeting on a regular basis to discuss any finance queries that those budget managers may have, and also obviously to make sure that we're looking ahead, not just looking at where we are at the moment. So that is all in place. With regards to the review on the pensions report, that's now reviewed by both myself and Danielle with Russ before we update the accounts, and obviously there was additional checking within the remuneration note this year and from next year. So we now have our financial accountant in place, and he will be leading on all matters relating to the final accounts going forward.
Thank you, Claire. Do members have questions for Robert?
Yeah, going back to the reclassification within fixed assets from London buildings to assets and construction. What is the significance of that to the accounts? I mean, what is the difference between those two categories? I suppose
It's so assets under construction is where obviously something isn't finished. So we've got a project which is ongoing. There's a complexity with Avonmouth in that the building itself is still there. So previously we've added on the extra works that have been undertaken to the building's value. But what we've agreed with the auditors this year is that because the project is a larger one, then we need to look at that slightly differently, and therefore we've categorised it as assets under construction. For us, the categorisation doesn't make a significant change, because the only potential change would be around depreciation. But because we don't actually depreciate in a year of acquisition, it hasn't had any effect at all in terms of the finances. So it is just a technical categorisation of works. I don't know if that answers your question.
if it stayed in that category for over a number of years, then it would have an effect.
It would, but you wouldn't expect it to stay in that category. So it's a short-term thing. So we would expect, because we know that Avonmouth is due to finish in this financial year, it will then move back into land and buildings.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. It was more just a comparative comment, really. On the review of journals, page 26, item 1, I was at the Somerset Audit Committee on Monday morning, and that very same point came up, and apparently the auditor said it comes up in more councils and local authorities than it doesn't. So I think it's a very sort of common pick-up, I suppose. But they didn't sort of highlight too much concern or worry on it, but it's certainly just worth noting, I suppose, that many councils have the same issue, and I suppose it's something we need to just look at on a just day-to-day basis, I suppose, and how you sort of view it. I suppose it's just day-to-day practice, isn't it?
It is, and I think, yeah, it is very much dependent on the internal control systems that they have in place. Certainly, coming from the NHS, which is where my background is mainly, we would always have an additional approval on journals. So, but I think it's, like I said, it's a very different way of accounting as well. So I think it's just that if mechanisms have been in place for a number of years, then sometimes there's not always that review. But that's just my opinion.
Chair, could I just raise something to support that response as well? I think part of this is the journey that the finance team have been on, because when I came in last year and we developed the financial improvement programme, one of the outcomes of that was the recognition that the finance department needed more resources. And by having more resources will enable Claire and the team to have that enhanced level of segregation of duties, which before, because they were such a small team, it was more difficult operationally to achieve. So I agree with everything that Claire said, and I have every confidence with Claire as head of finance, and that they've had this additional support that would be achieved.
Neil, did you have a question? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, well, the recommendations are for both agenda item 7 and agenda item 8. We'll deal with them together, both the external audit update and the audited annual statement of accounts. As we heard from Danielle earlier, we as a committee are asked to review and approve the 2020-2021 Statement of Accounts and Narrative Report, subject to the outstanding pensions information from the Pensions Fund Auditor, to publish those audited Statement of Accounts and Narrative Report on our website by the 30th of September 21 in accordance with the statutory deadline, and then to delegate the final approval of the audited Statement of Accounts and Narrative Report when the outstanding pensions information has been received and reviewed by Deloitte to the Fire Authority Chair, the AGEC Chair, the Chief Fire Officer and the Treasurer. So I would propose that we do that. Could I have a second on that? Thank you. Those in favour? Everybody in favour?
Chair, could I just...
of course not.
Sorry, raise a query about one or two questions on organisational performance. Is that being dealt with under this, or is that...
Organisation performance, I think, is coming on
your
to the next.
questions were referred as an action to the Performance Committee, Performance Review and Scrutiny Committee, and we have a meeting on the 9th of October, and I've asked that your particular query is raised as part of that committee's work.
But it is also coming up in the next agenda.
Right, okay, no, I just wanted to be sure that was going to be covered. Thank you. Okay, no, that's fine.
No problems at all. Okay, so are all those in favour of the recommendations? Are we unanimous? Brilliant, thank you very much. And I'd just like to say on behalf of the committee and myself, thanks to everyone who's been involved in doing this, Russ and everyone at BCC, Claire, Danielle of course, and the finance team, Angie and Amanda, everyone and Ian of course, and his team, for putting all these together for us. So we'll move on now to agenda item 9. Excuse me, I'll just get my papers together. Which is the annual governance statement, and Jane will be presenting on this one.
Morning, members. My name's Jane Williams-Locke. I'm the Deputy Director of Corporate Services. I'd like to present the Annual Governance Statement 2020-21 today. This is a decision paper. Each year we are required to produce an annual governance statement to comply with the accounts and audit regulations. SITFA have also issued some guidance in terms of the annual governance statement. Now, this only came out a couple of days ago, so I have briefly read it. We cover everything in the governance statement anyway, with what they are suggesting that we should cover. We also have to take account of the introduction of SITFA Financial Management Code 2019 in this governance statement that I'm presenting today. So I will work with finance to make sure that that is actually referenced within this document. If I could take you to page 167, section 7, which indicates the head of internal audit opinion, and they have given the opinion that the service has an adequate and effective framework for risk management, governance and internal control. If you look to 8.2 and 8.3 on that page, I will need to update with the external auditor's opinion and value for money opinion, and Ian has already said that that will be in due course. Once I get the actual wording, I will update that part of the annual governance statement. If you turn to 168, I just wanted members to be aware that in 2021 audit calendar, financial management was an audit which was carried out by internal audit, and they gave a substantial assurance for that audit, which means that is the highest level of audit that can be given. There were no recommendations, so I think that's really important to note that. On the same page, item 9, conclusion, my team carry out an annual review of effectiveness every year, and it's based around the SITFA good governance framework, and we ask a lot of questions of our managers and heads of units about the governance arrangements within the authority. On our basis of that self-assessment and annual review of effectiveness, we consider that the governance arrangements are adequate and effective. Item 10 on 169, the next page, you will see that the actual governance statement will need to be signed by the chair of the fire authority, chief fire officer, treasurer and clerk. If I can take you to page 174, which is Appendix A, and I just said about our annual review of effectiveness, you can see a breakdown under each question that is raised within the SITFA guidance, how we have supporting evidence, how we have actions implemented during the 2021 financial year, and what improvements are planned and delivered within 21-22. So I know it's a very long document, but I think it's really important that you can see what we've done, how we got the evidence to support what they are asking us to do, and what we're planning to do. The SIPA guidance that I referred to indicates that Appendix A should be a separate document that is published on our website. So next year I will ensure that is carried out. Other than that, I think that's my update to members. So if members have any questions.
Thank you, Chair.
Hi, I was going to ask you what SIPFA standard for.
Okay.
I've just seen it in the glossary of terms as the Chartered Institute of Financial Accountants.
Yeah.
Are we obliged to do as they say? As though that letter's arrived, you think I've got to do that? And has that gone to all the fire authorities in the country?
Because it's SIPFA guidance, I would imagine it would have gone out to all authorities. It's an advisory guidance, so it says to take into account the introduction of the SIPFA Financial Management Code. With all guidance, we will look at it. I will speak to finance about it and make sure that we are covering.
Is this something we pay for? Are we a member of this association?
Yes, we are, yeah.
And are we obliged to be?
I'll hand over to Claire.
Because SIPFA is the public finance.
Can you speak up?
Sorry, because SIPFA is the Public Finance Association, we do have to comply with their financial regulations.
So it's not advisory then, we've got to do it, is that what we're saying?
It depends on how it's issued. Certainly we have to comply with the finance code and anything which is attached to that. So yes, usually if it is SIPFA, unless it's advisory rather than guidance, we would have to comply with it.
Okay. Thanks. Any other questions for Jen?
There is an amendment to
There is.
the wording for the recommendations. So members, if you turn to page 151, which is the front page of this report, there's a suggestion that in order to reflect that latest notes, we add a sentence to the end of recommendation A. So recommendation A currently says the committee is asked to agree the content of the draft annual governance statement on the condition that paragraphs 8.2 and 8.3 are updated once external audit have completed the audit of the accounts and annual report, including commentary and value for money. And here we propose that we add a sentence, and also subject to the addition of a reference to the new SIPFA Financial Management Code 2019, which applies for 2020-21 as recommended by the external auditors. So that's the addition to paragraph A. And then paragraph B, the committee is asked to approve the publication of the annual governance statement 2020-21 alongside the final audited statement of accounts.
Thank you, Amanda. Andy, did you want to say anything around the oath forming and the decision that it's been passed at the PRSC and
Yeah, I do, but I think this refers to Councillor Button's mistake that he had a question on the performance kind of area, which I think mentioned both in annual governance statement and in the narrative statement. So I think perhaps Chair just need to invite Councillor Buttons to ask this question in regards to that. So then
thank you.
respond.
Neil.
Thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, I think we ought to issue congratulations again.
Absolutely.
For a great job. So, I wasn't quite sure how to raise this issue, but under response under 64, page 64, the saying says, where we have not met our response standards, which is 10 incidents, it is usually because the nearest fire plant is in the midst of dealing with other incidents. And I'm just wondering whether at some point we might focus a bit on that. Maybe.
Sorry, what page did you say that was?
This is page 64.
64, thank you.
does seem a little bit open-ended. I'm just wondering if the appropriate, whether it's us or another committee, look into that and just check what we're expecting. You know, I mean, as soon as a fire plant leaves one station, is it a fact that there is a backup sent immediately to cover that, or are there guidelines about if it's going to take 10 minutes or something, we won't do that?
I think this is something that's dealt with by the PRSC, but I'll let Angie.
Councillor, I can refer your question about that to PRSC for their next meeting. I think the stats on this page for response on page 64 all show that we have responded within time to all types of category. Yeah. So in many ways the question's a moot point because we haven't had to have a backup. Everybody has been responded to in time. But I get your point. What is the plan? So I think I'll get them to outline that to the next meeting. And I'll report back to you by email so you can see what has been said at the next meeting.
Okay, so going back to the recommendations for agenda item 9, as amended, as detailed by Amanda, the recommendations are that the committee is asked to agree that the content of the draft annual governance statement on the condition that paragraphs 8.2 and 8.3 are updated once external audit have completed. The audit of the accounts and annual report, including the commentary on value for money, and also subject to the addition of a reference to the new SIPFA Financial Management Code 2019, which applies to 2020-21 as recommended by the external auditors. And the committee is asked to approve the publication of the annual governance statement alongside the final audited statement of accounts. So I'd like to propose that we follow those recommendations. Do I have a seconder for that? Neil, thank you very much. Is there anybody against that? No? All those in favour then? That's unanimous.
For the minutes, I can give you the additional wording for the resolution.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Jane, for your presentation. I'll let you make your way back, and I'll invite Vicky to come up for the agenda item 10, which is the internal audit progress report and the internal audit report on performance management. Quick decontamination. No disrespect to you at all there, Jane. Thank you. Vicky, if you'd like to introduce yourself and then go on from there.
Thank you, Chair. So, Vicky Gould, Internal Audit, RSM. I'm here to present to you our progress report and our most recent internal audit report on performance management. So the first paper is our progress report, which sets out progress in delivery of the 21-22 internal audit plan. Section 2 shows the proposed dates and how we're getting on. The training audit is underway, almost completed. Fleet management is scoped.
Sorry, this is page 204.
And our financial management audit was scoped yesterday. So we are on track to deliver the internal audit plan in line with the agreed timetable. Section 3 on page 205, where we asked about changes to the internal audit plan. We did have a contingency allocation this year where we discussed either using this for some IT advisory support or a pensions review. And the local pensions board has formally requested that AJEC approve the contingency to be used for a pensions review by the end of the calendar year. So we're asking for your approval on that. And then we've also attached our recent emergency services sector briefing, and I've pulled out some of the fire-related items that might be useful for you to read at your leisure. So that's the progress report. If there's not any questions, I'll move on to the performance management report.
Yeah, we could do a question at the end.
Okay. So this is the first audit of the 21-22 internal audit plan. So we looked to do some data quality testing around the KPIs reported through performance reports through to the committee's fire authority. We looked at the internal quality check process around data and KPIs. We looked at areas of underperformance and what was being done to action and address those areas of underperformance. And then we also provided some benchmarking around what other fire authorities report through their performance reports. And that's going to feed in through to the new service plan and how you're monitoring KPIs and performance there. So we, as you can see in the conclusion on page 221, we consider that there's a well-designed performance measures and performance management framework, but we did identify 2 areas where this could be enhanced, and they were quite linked, and it was around kind of setting out roles and responsibilities for those responsible for performance management, and then also ensuring that there's greater kind of internal peer review and check and challenge at the SLT level around performance. But we did provide a reasonable assurance opinion, which is a positive assurance opinion. And you'll note that this report, we're trialling the new shorter versions. This is an exception report. So whilst you don't see all of the positives in there, we've tried to reflect that with the green ticks in the key findings section on page 222 and 223. So hopefully this meant less reading for you when you were going through your papers. Also to note that the benchmarking has been summarised in the appendix at the back on page 225, but we've provided more detailed information to management to be able to use that going forward with their service plan. So I'll take any questions on this one.
Thank you. Do any members have any questions on those? Thank you. No? We're all happy? Good. Okay, that item was for information, but I will just find the recommendations again and read them out. So we are asked to consider the internal audit progress report for the 21-22 year to date and the sector briefing appended in Appendix 1, to consider the internal audit report, findings and agreed management actions for the following audits and provide feedback on the new report format, performance management Appendix 2, and to confirm at the request of the local pension board approval for the internal auditors to proceed with testing the internal controls in place to process immediate detriment payments in line with the AFA decision on 30th June 2021 and the underpinning advice and guidance. So I don't think we need a vote on that, but we're all happy with those recommendations.
I think we could, if everybody agrees. Is everybody in favour?
Thank you, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
For that. We shall move on to item 11, which we should invite Jane to come back up for, please. This is the update on the completion of internal audit recommendations and management actions. Starting on page 232.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
This paper is for consideration and noting. This report updates members on the current position regarding completion of internal audit recommendations and actions. The service leadership team monitor and sign off completed actions every quarter. So this report goes to them every quarter. They discuss the evidence to suggest that it needs to be completed and they will sign it off. If I can if I can just say, at the May 2021 committee meeting, this committee, it was agreed that I would slim down this report. So we are focusing on key areas for scrutiny. So that's why it's a slimmed down version. Okay. If we go to page 236, you will see a table there of the 2020-21 audit, summary of audit recommendations. You will note that we had a series of audits taken place, and 36 actions were agreed by Avon management under all of those audits. 11 actions have been completed, 12 are on track, and 13 require extension, primarily because if you notice, they relate to key units that were involved in the pandemic, and so HR, workforce planning, so those are why they needed to be delayed, because they had to push resources into the COVID-19 pandemic. Also on 2021-22, which is just started, we've had one audit taken place, which is performance management, and Vicky just updated you on that one. We had 2 recommended actions out of that. One has been completed and one is on track. I won't go through all of this, but if members have any questions, then...
Thank you, Jane. Andy, did you want to say anything about how the decisions that have been made regarding the pandemic and how capacity has been put from some of these departments, obviously, into the front line and dealing with the here and now, and is now coming back, sort of pandemic reset to...
Happy to, Chair. So, as Jane's described, that as we all know, all organisations have been hit with the pandemic, and we're no exception to that. Obviously, we have additional challenges to that, being a 24/7 emergency service as well. So therefore, it is positive that you have seen that since the last time AGEC looked at the internal audit actions. Some have progressed and some have been completed. As a service leadership board and a service leadership team, obviously we take a risk-based approach to where our staff are deployed, and looking at the internal audit ones which are outstanding, none of which are high and a number of them are advisory. The decision was taken by SLT and SLB to divert some of those resources to working around the kind of pandemic. I think if you look at a number of the recommendations which are kind of outstanding, they are sort of business as usual around sort of strategy writing and policy adjustments. And of course the decision was making that could probably wait because we've been working in a very different environment around the pandemic anyway. But what SLT and SLD have recently commissioned is that as we are now moving some of those specialists back into the business as usual teams, that we now need to do a reset of the internal audit and deadlines around some of the outstanding ones. And so that's what we'll be coming back to you in November, is what the new dates for completions are, because of course what we don't want to do is lose sight of their completion, and we do want to make sure that they are now kind of progressing. And what we have also done, for example, in our workforce planning team and our health and safety team, has agreed as SLT some additional resource in that team to enable them to continue to deal with some of the aspects of the pandemic and also deal with the internal audit ones alongside it. So hopefully that provides kind of further context in terms of the decision making around where we've deployed our resources, but also that we are looking again at those completion dates, and we will bring some back to you in November.
Thanks, Angela. That's very helpful. Thanks, Joe. Do members have any questions on that? Okay, well, we're just asked to consider and note the progress made. And again, having gone through the period of the pandemic, I'd like to thank everyone for making the progress that we have. And I'm all for streamlining reports. Jane, so that's much appreciated as well, and thank you very much.
Sorry, it's reference to Doug's number of occasions. It's good, it's a focus on these duties and so forth. I'm just wondering whether anybody might want to comment a bit on what kind of work activities are organised. I don't think strictly our committee, but nonetheless.
I would imagine the pandemic has had an effect on recruitment events and reaching out to certain communities and so forth.
People and Culture sat recently and had a paper with an update on this very subject. So I confess I haven't reread it for this meeting because I looked at it I think over a week ago now. So Councillor, can I suggest you look at that on our website? It is published. And if you have any additional questions, because there's a full update.
Thank you, Neil. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 12 now, which again we'll be asking Claire to present. It is for information, but also for a decision. This is for the devolved budgets overview. So first off, I'll let Claire get settled in and present. Thank you.
So this is just an update on where we are and what are the next steps in terms of our devolved budget within the finance team and also across the service. So we'll just give a few highlights from the report, which was to provide an update on progress with the implementation of devolved budgets across the service and to outline the next steps on the rollout. And what I'm asking with this report is that the note the content of it and then agree to receive a further update at the November 2021 meeting of this committee. So in terms of the progress to date, so we've had a shadowing period in place for our standard budget reporting process and the devolved budgets from May to September of this year. So that's where within the finance team we've run our standard reports, but also we've used our new cost centre structure to run those on a devolved budget process. We've also shared those reports with the Director of Corporate Services and also with the CFO for their specific budgets, and then taken feedback on those to make sure that the budget reports that we're producing are fit for purpose and are easily understood by the people that are obviously monitoring those reports. And that then leads on to the next steps, which will be to reissue those reports to the CFO and to the Director of Corporate Services, but also to the Chair, Head of Transformation, and to continue to engage with all of the directors and budget managers and meet with them to ensure that we're taking their requirements into account when we're producing these reports. We're also, as part of that process, highlighting issues which may be more complex within those reports, where we've got crossover across the service. So it's not easy, obviously, then to devolve out, and it's understanding that and how we can then show that in a representative and appropriate way when we're talking to people about their budgets. And also, as part of the budget setting process and obviously our medium-term financial plan, we'll actually be able to use some of the information from devolved budgets to make sure that we're taking into account any areas that we need to. There will also be some ongoing work around the Constitution and the financial regulations, which I briefly spoke about earlier, and certainly around a scheme of delegation, which will set financial limits throughout the service in terms of what will be required from those budget managers and budget holders. And then there will be an update of financial policies and procedures which will underpin those regulations. So like I say, that was a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of what was in the paper rather than me going through it all in detail. So if there are any questions, happy to answer those.
Thank you. Do members have any questions? No? Okay, thank you very much, Claire. Obviously, we were asked to note the contents of this report, but also to agree to receive a further update at our next meeting in November. I presume everyone's happy with that? Okay, thank you. Well, thank you all. We just have one last item left now, which is the date of the next meeting, which will be the 24th November at 10:30 hours. Do we know where the venue will be, or?
We're still waiting to see what updates are going to be made to COVID guidance. So we're trying, what I would say to members is I'm very aware that we're having meetings in bigger rooms at the moment, so we're having to use the headquarters or this location, which may not be the most convenient to some of you. So I'm very aware that some of you are having to travel more than others, and I apologise for that. But it is a room capacity issue, and a lot of our headquarters has continued its capacity limitations, and so that's meant that we are stuck in the bigger rooms again. So if I can change that for November so that we move around the area a bit more to make it fair, I will certainly do that. So Emma and I will review and we'll confirm the venue near the time.
Thank you very much. Okay.